Cold steel kissed the soft skin above her brow, a whisper of metal that seemed for a second to freeze the world into a single suspended heartbeat. The recruit's breath hitched, his knuckles blanched around the stock. Around them, the assembly of trainees held their own breathing like a collective secret. Every inhale a small strike against the silence that had swallowed the training hall. She did not flinch. She let the barrel rest there, felt the faint heat of it against her. The air smelled of oil and sweat and the faint tang of old coffee from a forgotten thermos. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with the dull constancy of things that have always been there. Outside, rain picked at metal roofs, making steady, indifferent staccato that seemed to underscore everything. Elise Hartman's face, red like a map of storms, survived. Her hair, cut close to practical, was streaked by silver that had nowhere to hide. Lines around her eyes were not merely age. They were the cartography of long nights and decisions that once cost others their lives. She wore the crisp black of the instructors. The rank and braided cord tucked with indifferent ceremony, she stood as if rooted, not waiting but entirely present. An immovable axis in the sudden orbit of juvenile fury. Eric Mason, a recruit with more bravado than experience, had set the barrel at her temple as a provocation. He'd wanted a reaction, a laugh, proof that the woman everyone whispered about was nothing more than a relic. He'd been jeering moments before, voice loud enough to ricochet off concrete, the kind of voice made by those who have not yet learned the weight of consequence. "You think you can lecture us," he'd said. "What's left to teach?" His teeth showed as he smiled. The rifle trembled. Lisa's voice arrived without force. Precise, dry, the kind of voice that had once been used to give orders and had the habit of being obeyed. "Lower the weapon," she said. It was not a command so much as an observation. It was as if she described the weather. There was no immediate capitulation. Pride has a way of hardening into stupidity. Derek's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked toward the clustering bodies of his peers, searching for support or permission to escalate. He thought himself protected by numbers and the theater of youthful contempt. The faintest click came from the rifle, not a gunshot, but a mechanical whisper like a secret opened. That sound pulled like a needle at the seam of the situation, threatening to tear it into blood and authority and headlines. Then she moved, not with the theatrical flair of a movie stunt, not with the exaggerated force of revenge fantasies, but with a movement honed by necessity, efficient, surgical. Her hand closed on his wrist, and the barrel tilted. His balance shifted, and then he found concrete where he had thought to stand triumphant. The rifle skittered away and clanged, an ugly punctuation in the hush. Eric's face hit the floor with a thud muted by the thick carpet of adrenaline among the onlookers. She had him pinned in a way that left no theater for bravado. Her knee pressed into the back of his shoulder, her other hand steadying his wrist like a mechanic holding an engine. There was no yelling, no grandstanding. Her calm contained more force than any shout could muster. The hall exhaled as one organism, the collective breath, returning after being held so long that lungs began to ache. "Never put a muzzle on anyone unless you are willing to pay the price if it goes wrong," she said, each word deliberate. The recruits could not agree if she was warning him or himself. Her eyes, those pale, relentless eyes, scanned the room and held each of them for a moment. Shame did not fall like lightning. It arrived as a slow, sinking tide. When she released him, it was not an act of mercy, but of instruction. He scrambled up, cheeks flushed, with the kind of humiliation that burns a little longer than physical pain. Others avoided his gaze. Whispers blossomed into a low drone, curiosity braided with caution. Elise stepped outside into the rain. The wet air filled her lungs with the sharpness of cold and the smell of recently turned earth. She closed her eyes and let the cold water tap her face, as if to rinse away the residue of old battles. Inside, the recruits rearranged themselves into formations, training resuming with the same mechanical rigor they always had, but now threaded through with a new string of wariness. Later, in the dim corridor that led to the barracks, gossip moved faster than truth. They called her things: myth, spectre, a woman hardened by places their maps could not name. Stories echoed back and forth without ownership. Tales of a lost operation, a black sand desert, friends who had not come back. Some said she had been broken and rebuilt from parts of herself that no machine could replace. Others said she had been spared by chance or by betrayal on paper, and that what kept her awake at night wasn't fear but unfinished accounting. Elise did not dismiss the rumors. She had sharpened herself on that rumor economy. She had learned that to be a story was to be watched, and to be watched was to be vulnerable in new ways. She understood the virtue of silence. Words could be manipulated, explanations broken down like brittle bone. She kept her past contained, a ledger closed to all but memory. Beneath the veneer of everyday drills, though, there was a small, persistent gnaw, an intuition that had teeth. Training bases attracted their share of hardened characters. Some used the routine to rebuild, others to hide. Elise felt the difference between those trying to belong and those who were there to observe, to test. She read movements the way a reader reads a page, the tilt of a head, the way a hand rested on a belt, the cadence of laughter that tried too hard. Within the week, an incident would occur that confirmed her suspicion, a misplaced tool, a magazine left where a meticulous man would never leave it, a glance that flickered toward her with a recognition that was too practiced. She would find instead of routine, another kind of pattern, a deliberate thread sewn into the fabric of the unit that had nothing to do with ranks or promotions. Now, at the moment when Derek had knelt in the concrete and rain beat against the world's metallic roof, Elise Hartman simply pulled on her jacket and walked a little farther until the lights from the hall blurred. Rain seemed to drum in a rhythm she had once known by heart, steady and relentless, like a metronome counting the seconds of her life. In her pockets, there were small things left from a former life. A dog-eared photograph whose edges had been softened by finger oils, a coin stamped with an insignia, and a note folded small and worn. She did not pretend her body did not remember the truth, that there had been a night when command had chosen silence over rescue, a night when radios stayed dark and the desert threw back the sound of her team in pieces. She had buried that night beneath duty and the careful construction of meaning. Some nights she thought the burial had been enough. Other nights she woke and felt the coffin lid shift. Out in the drizzle, the city hummed with a mundane life that was at once comforting and infuriating. Civilians walked dogs and argued about nothing worth hysterics. Shops buzzed. Children still dared the streets. She let that normality wash across her, smoothing the raw edges that still pressed inward like scars. When she returned to the barracks, the recruits were asleep in staggered shifts, bodies slack with physical exhaustion, dreams untroubled by things that had teeth. Derek's face would later be pale with apology. Maybe he would try to avoid her. Maybe he would insist later that he meant no real threat. But memory does not alter facts, it only reframes them. The picture of a rifle at someone's temple does not wash away with excuses. Elise sat on a low cot and unfolded the small note from her duffel. In a hand she used when she wrote to herself in younger days, a single line read, "Don't let them make you small." The ink had faded, but the instruction had not. She closed her eyes and let the room tilt as sleep took her brief and earnest. She woke at 2 in the morning to the metallic whisper of a message she would not receive on any official channel. The slow, persistent knowledge that this place, this rotation, was not random. Someone had threaded danger into the routine. Someone had returned to old habits. The thought was cold and immediate, and it pulled together everything she had been teaching into a single focus. Protection, yes, but also retribution if necessary. Outside, a car's headlights slashed across empty pavement. Inside, the base slept on, unknowing and soft. Elise stood, pulled the jacket around her, and moved toward the window. Her reflection in the glass was a ghost with shoulders squared. She had been made into many things, a soldier, an instructor, a story. She had also been given, unwillingly, the knowledge of how to make plans for consequences. Tomorrow, she decided, would be a day for watching. Tonight, she allowed herself one small private indulgence. the image of a desert at sunset, the faces of comrades who had laughed before they were cut away. She held that image like a relic, and beneath it, a vow fastened itself around her ribs. Not a promise of vengeance, but a promise of truth. The rifle at her temple had been an act of theater. It had also been an invitation. And Elise Hartman, who had been walked through hell and back with a compass made of grief and resolve, did not refuse invitations. She merely prepared. Morning came wrapped in fog thick enough to turn the training field into a ghost of itself. The horizon was an absence rather than a line, the kind of grey that blurred the living and the dead. Rive echoed from the loudspeakers, a tired trumpet dragging recruits out of their beds. The world smelled of damp soil, boot polish, and the faint burn of brewed coffee from the mess hall. Elise Hartman was already awake. She always was. Sleep for her had long since become a shallow thing, a visitor who stayed only long enough to mock her with memories. She sat on the edge of her cot, the same posture every morning, feet flat, elbows resting lightly on her knees, hands clasped together. Her eyes traced the dim light leaking through the blind. Discipline, she'd once told herself, wasn't about control. It was about surviving the moments when control didn't matter anymore. When she stepped outside, recruits were already forming ranks. Their chatter faltered when they saw her. The incident from the previous day still hung in the air like the metallic smell after a lightning strike. Derek Mason stood stiffly in the middle row, his face pale, his jaw clenched in a way that betrayed regret. He wasn't brave enough to voice. Elise's boots sank slightly into the mud as she crossed the yard. Every step she took was soundless authority, every movement measured. Formation, she said quietly. The word didn't need to be loud. It carried the weight of a command that expected obedience. They lined up, eyes forward, spines stiff. The fog pressed close, muting colors, swallowing sound. Yesterday, she began, her tone even. You saw what happens when arrogance replaces discipline. Her gaze didn't linger on Derek, but he felt it anyway, like a shadow tracing the back of his neck. The weapon doesn't care who you are. It only obeys the hands it's in. If those hands belong to pride, someone dies. No one spoke, she continued. You're not soldiers yet. You're possibilities. That's all a recruit ever is. The space between what they are and what they might become. Some of you will fill that space with courage. Some will fill it with fear. My job isn't to make you better. My job is to show you which one you are. Her words didn't rise. They sank, steady and cold, until they rested in the quiet hearts of those listening. Training began. Push-ups in the wet dirt. Rifle drills. Endurance runs across the slick, uneven terrain behind the barracks. She moved among them like a spectre, not shouting but watching, adjusting postures, correcting grips, speaking only when necessary. The rain returned, a thin drizzle that clung to skin and blurred the outlines of fatigue. When Derek stumbled, she didn't help him up. She simply said, "Find your balance." He did, gritting his teeth, mud on his face, eyes fierce with something new. Shame turned into fuel. By midday, the fog lifted and sunlight broke through, cutting sharp lines across the compound. For a moment it looked like a world reborn. The recruits collapsed near the track, panting, uniforms heavy with sweat and water. Elise stood at the edge, arms folded, studying them like a sculptor examining unfinished work. But her focus wasn't on the group anymore. It was on the man standing apart, Recruit Hughes. He was quiet, competent and wrong. His every motion was too clean, too deliberate. He didn't have the raw hesitations of new soldiers. He had polish, the kind that only comes from years in the field. She'd noticed him even before the rifle incident. The way he tracked her movements, not with curiosity but calculation. The way he lingered after dismissal, pretending to tie his boots. It was subtle, so subtle most instructors wouldn't have seen it. But Elise Hartman had lived too long in the world of shadows to miss the smell of surveillance. After drills, she called him over. "Hughes," she said. "Walk with me." They circled the perimeter track, the mud squelching under their boots. She didn't look at him at first. She watched the tree line instead, the distant fence, the crows perched along the barbed wire. "Where'd you train before this?" she asked casually. He hesitated, then said, "Fort Irwin, ma'am. That so?" she replied. "Strange. I ran Irwin for a rotation in 2021. Don't remember your name." He blinked once, a fraction too slow. "Wasn't there long," he said. "Most people who've been there remember the sandstorms." "You didn't mention them." Silence followed. Then, carefully, "Maybe I just forgot." Elise smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Nobody forgets Irwin." She stopped walking. He did too. For a long time they stood there, two statues in a field of ghosts. "Finally," she said quietly, "tell whoever sent you that I'm done being studied. They can come talk to me themselves." Hughes didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes flickered, the briefest flash of guilt or warning, and then he nodded once, almost respectfully, and walked away. Elise stayed behind, watching him disappear through the mist that had begun to creep back in from the hills. She didn't move for a long time. The air smelled of wet soil and tension. Later, when the sun had dropped low and the compound lights began to hum alive, she sat alone in her office. The blinds were half closed, the desk covered in reports she hadn't read. A file lay open in front of her, redacted lines, blurred signatures. Old ghosts printed in black ink. The phone on her desk buzzed once, no caller ID. She didn't pick it up. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. 5 people standing together in desert camouflage, grinning like they'd beaten death and expected to again. Her thumb brushed over one face, a woman named Rivera, dead officially. Her hand tightened. Outside, thunder grumbled across the hills, low and distant, like something stirring awake. She knew now. The past wasn't buried. It was circling back, wearing a new uniform. And this time, she wasn't planning to hide. Night wrapped the compound in a silence that felt unnatural. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that came before the wrong kind of noise. Wind whispered through the flagpoles, making them clink softly like wind chimes at a gravesite. The security lights flickered in intervals, casting shifting patterns across the training yard. Elise Hartman moved through the corridors of the administrative building, like a ghost, retracing her old haunts. She wasn't supposed to be there after lights out, but her clearance, though officially retired, still opened doors most instructors never knew existed. Inside her jacket pocket, she carried a small flash drive she hadn't used in years. It held fragments of her past, mission logs, coded transcripts, names that didn't belong to anyone living. When she reached the records room, she paused. Her breath was steady, eyes sharp. She swiped her badge. The lock clicked. Inside, the smell of dust and ozone clung to the air. Fluorescent lights flickered awake, bathing shelves of files in sterile white. She moved through them quickly, fingers brushing over faded labels. Logistics, training rotations, field transfers, until she found the one she'd been waiting for. Personnel Archive, Rotation Delta 9. The same code as her final mission. She opened it. Inside, paper met silence. Sheets of documentation redacted beyond comprehension. Black bars where truth used to live. And then a photo. Hughes, but not as a recruit. As an operator, 2 years earlier. Attached to Special Operations Group, Shadow Initiative. Her stomach turned cold. The name was familiar, too familiar. It was the same covert program that had sent her and her team into the desert 7 years ago. The operation that had ended with her radio going dead and her entire squad erased from the record. She set the photo down and exhaled slowly, the sound more like a growl than breath. Someone was testing her. She turned off the lights, closed the drawer, and slipped back into the hallway. Her boots made no sound against the polished floor. The silence around her was thick enough to make her feel watched. And then, just before she reached the exit, she saw it, a shadow reflected in the glass of the door. Someone standing behind her, unmoving. She pivoted. The hallway was empty. But there was something on the floor, a folded piece of paper, weighted by a spent bullet casing. She crouched and opened it, 2 words typed, "Stop digging." For a moment she simply stared. Then she smiled. The kind of small, dangerous smile that comes from realizing the enemy is afraid you'll succeed. By dawn, the compound looked the same as always. Morning drills, shouted commands, recruits stumbling through exhaustion. Yet Elise felt the change in the air. The air was thicker, taut with unspoken orders. People looked at her differently. Derek Mason, who had spent the last 2 days silent and watchful, approached her during gear inspection. "Ma'am," he muttered, hesitant, "you ever get the feeling someone's watching us?" She studied him. His tone wasn't joking. It was earnest, low, careful. She nodded once, always. He blinked. "No, I mean, really watching, like cameras that aren't supposed to be there." Her eyes sharpened. "Where?" he hesitated. "Armory storage. Last night, I swear the light blinked red like a recording signal." But the security feed said all units offline. Elise exhaled, thinking. "You're sure?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't tell anyone else," she said. "Not even the sergeant," he frowned. "Why not?" "Because the sergeant answers to someone. And right now, I don't know who that someone is." The recruit swallowed hard and nodded. That afternoon, Elise walked the perimeter under the pretense of inspecting drills. Every few meters, her eyes tracked subtle inconsistencies, freshly patched concrete, exposed wiring, small lens covers that shouldn't exist in a basic training facility. The surveillance wasn't military standard. It was covert, black-level hardware. Whoever had installed it hadn't expected her to look this closely. By evening, she had mapped 6 camera points and 2 possible relay hubs. The data wasn't being sent to command. It was being rerouted. Somewhere off-site, someone high up wanted to monitor her without going through official channels. She sat in her office, lights off, watching the glow from the base floodlights cut through her blinds. Her laptop screen showed a decrypted snippet she'd pulled from the data stream. It wasn't much, just fragments of text, repeating every few minutes, subject alive, behavioral deviation minimal, continue containment protocols, containment, not surveillance, not observation, containment. She leaned back, heart thudding in quiet, deliberate rhythm. It wasn't about the recruits, it was about her. The knock came just before midnight. 3 sharp taps, measured, not hesitant. "Hughes," she said, before the door even opened. He stepped in, uniform immaculate, face blank. "You shouldn't be in this building after hours," he said softly. "Neither should you," she replied. "Said." He hesitated, then shut the door behind him. The silence stretched until it became something alive. "You found the files," he said at last. She didn't answer. He took a slow breath. "They'll come for you now." Her gaze was steady. "Let them." Hughes shook his head. "You don't understand. It's not command anymore. Shadow Initiative isn't under defense oversight. It's private now, funded, weaponized. They want what's left of your skill set, the program that was inside your head. The part they couldn't replicate." Elise's jaw tightened. "They tried to rebuild it." He nodded. "They failed, until they found me." It was confession and warning all at once. She studied him in silence. Then she said, almost kindly, "You're not going to make it easy for them, are you?" He hesitated. "No, ma'am. Then you're already better than they deserve." A faint sound interrupted. The slow hum of electricity, the subtle crack of a power relay flipping. Then the lights went out. The emergency red glow kicked in, painting the room in the color of blood. Elise rose. "They're here." Hughes drew his sidearm, but Elise raised a hand. "No gunfire." "Not here. We don't scare the kids." Outside, boots moved in synchronized rhythm, too precise to be regular guards. The storm had arrived. Elise reached for the drawer where she'd hidden her old sidearm, a battered SIG P226 that had been with her through 3 tours and too many ghosts. Her hand didn't tremble. "Hughes," she said quietly, "if you make it through this, remember one thing." "What's that?" "The ones who survive don't do it by running. They do it by deciding what's worth dying for." Then she opened the door and stepped into the red-lit corridor. The past was no longer following her. It had caught up. The red emergency lights pulsed through the hallway, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Elise Hartman walked into the storm without hesitation. The air was thick with tension, that peculiar stillness before violence breaks the world into fragments. Every shadow looked alive, every breath carried warning. She moved with a predator's grace, measured steps, body low, eyes scanning the corners where the glow of the lights didn't reach. She could feel them before she saw them, The intruders ghosts in matte black gear, gliding through the compound with professional silence. Not amateurs, not recruits. Not recruit. These men were trained, disciplined, and lethal. Shadow Initiative had sent its best. Through the narrow corridor, a faint mechanical click echoed. The sound of suppressed weapons being checked. Elise ducked behind a steel support beam, fingers brushing the cool metal of her cig. Her heartbeat stayed steady. She'd lived this moment 1,000 times before, in jungles, deserts, city alleys. The difference now was that this wasn't foreign soil. This was home, and they had come for her here. A soft radio whisper carried from the stairwell. Target confirmed in Quadrant 3. Contain and extract. Contain and extract, not kill. That was a mistake. From her crouched position, Elise slipped the safety off, leaned into the beam, and waited. One operator passed her, silent, confident, his rifle angled low. Another followed. A third. Then she moved. 3 precise shots. Throat, chest, leg. Each man dropped without a sound. Before the fourth could react, she was behind him, twisting his wrist until his weapon clattered to the floor. She whispered, "How long have they been watching me?" He gurgled, refusing to answer. "Wrong answer," she said, and knocked him unconscious with a sharp strike to the jaw. She dragged the bodies into the janitor's closet and closed the door softly. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger clouded judgment. She was calculating, assessing their formation, their routes, the rhythm of their infiltration. Whoever sent them didn't expect resistance this sharp. From the training yard, she could hear the muffled panic of recruits being rounded up by instructors who didn't understand what was happening. She wanted to get to them, but that wasn't the priority. First, she had to cut the head off the serpent. She slipped into the armory, where rows of rifles gleamed under the emergency lights. Hughes was already there, crouched behind a stack of crates. His uniform was half torn, his face smeared with dust. He looked young, too young for this kind of night. "They took the command center," he whispered. "They locked everyone out of the network." Elise crouched beside him. "They'll use the comms to stage it as a rogue veteran incident. You'll disappear as collateral." His eyes widened. "Why?" "Because it's easier to bury a lie than explain a truth." She scanned the room. 2 exits, both compromised. 1 vent shaft near the ceiling, narrow but navigable. She pulled a wrench from the bench and started loosening the bolts. Hughes frowned. "We're crawling through a vent." She gave him a sidelong look. "You got a better plan?" He didn't. They climbed up, the metal groaning beneath their weight. The air was stale, full of dust and old sweat. Crawling through the shaft, Elise's mind drifted to the last mission she'd been on before retirement. The mission where her team vanished. She remembered the coded order: eliminate non-compliant assets. She thought it meant insurgents. It hadn't. It had meant her. Now, she could see the same signatures all over this op. The tactics, the phrasing, even the discipline. Whoever led Shadow Initiative hadn't just tried to recreate her unit. They'd weaponized her legacy. They dropped out of the vent into the command center. Monitors glowed in the dark, streaming live feeds from cameras all over the compound. Elise's eyes darted to one of them, the recruit dormitory. Armed men were moving inside, lining the terrified trainees against the wall. Her jaw clenched. "They're making an example," she muttered, to frame it as an internal rebellion. On one of the screens, the sergeant of the base, Collins, stood with his hands up, shouting something inaudible before a soldier struck him down with the butt of a rifle. Elise's stomach burned. Collins had been harsh, arrogant, but not a traitor. She leaned over the console. "Hughes, lock down the armory doors remotely. Make sure those recruits stay alive." He nodded, typing fast. The system flickered, briefly hijacked. Done. Elise began pulling data logs from the main terminal. Most were encrypted, but one folder wasn't, labeled simply Project Atlas. She clicked it open. Images, psychological profiles, training simulations. Every recruit on base was listed. Not as students, but as subjects. Subject type, behavioral conditioning. Objective, instill obedience under duress. Method, simulated conflict exposure. Supervisor Hartman, E. Her breath caught. They had used her name, her credentials, to authorize an entire covert experiment. The compound wasn't a training site. It was a lab, and she was the control variable. Behind her, Hughes read over her shoulder, horrified. "They forged your clearance." "No," she said quietly. "They cloned it." A crash of boots echoed down the corridor. "They're coming," Hughes hissed. Elise pocketed the drive and stood. "Good. Let's see if they still remember how I trained them." The first two operators burst through the door, weapons raised. Elise fired before they could aim. One fell instantly. The other stumbled back, clutching his chest. Hughes covered her flank, taking down another intruder with a clean shot to the shoulder. The firefight was short but brutal, controlled chaos, steel and breath and heartbeats colliding. When the smoke cleared, only silence remained. Hughes leaned against the console, breathing hard. "That can't be all of them." "It's not," Elise replied. That was the first wave. Outside, thunder rolled. Not from the sky, but from the rumble of incoming vehicles. Reinforcements. Elise walked to the window and stared into the dark horizon. "They're coming to erase everything. This base. The data. Us." Hughes swallowed. "What do we do?" Elise turned to him, eyes cold but alive. "We make them regret thinking I'd die quietly." She reached for the radio on the fallen operative's vest and pressed the transmit button. "This is Hartman," she said, her voice low but steady. "You came to extract me? Good. I'll save you the trouble. I'm coming to you." For a moment, the radio hissed static. Then a man's voice answered, calm, measured, chillingly familiar. "Hello again, Captain. Thought you'd retired." Elise froze. That voice hadn't spoken to her in years. Not since the desert. Not since the betrayal. "Major Rourke," she said softly. The ghost had a name. And now, he was back to finish what he'd started. The sound of engines broke the horizon before the headlights did. Low, steady, and patient. Elise Hartman stood at the window of the command center, watching the distant hum of black SUVs crawl toward the base like a slow-moving infection. Dust rose behind them, curling into the night air like smoke from a coming fire. Major Rourke always had a signature. He didn't attack with chaos. He suffocated his targets with precision. Hughes stood a few feet away, eyes darting between the monitors. "They're jamming external comms," he said, voice tight. "No radio, no satellite, we're sealed." Elise didn't turn. "Good, that means they're scared." He stared at her. "Scared? Ma'am, we're surrounded." She looked over her shoulder, calm and unblinking. "Exactly." In the distance, the floodlights of the compound flickered, one by one falling into darkness until only the dim emergency reds remained. The wind pressed against the windows, carrying the faint echo of boots hitting gravel in perfect unison. The sound wasn't loud, but deliberate. A declaration of arrival. Rourke wanted her to hear it. "Hughes," Elise said, her voice low but commanding, "I need access to the base schematics." He hesitated. "Most of the systems are locked, then unlock them." He started typing, hands trembling. She could see the fear in him, real, human, raw. He wasn't built for this. Not yet, but something inside him was changing. His pulse was fear, but his movements were determination. She'd seen that before. In herself, years ago, before the military turned survival into a science. When the files loaded, she scanned the map quickly. They'll breach through 3 points. The south fence, the maintenance bay, and the east stairwell. They won't risk explosives. They need the structure intact for cleanup. "Cleanup?" Hughes asked. "They'll burn the evidence. Make it look like an internal revolt. They'll paint us as the aggressors, and Shadow Initiative will vanish again. Just like it did before." She pointed at the vents along the western hall. "If we can funnel them through here, I can control their movement. One corridor, one angle, one fight at a time." He looked at her like she'd said something impossible. "You're going to fight them alone." She smiled faintly. "Not alone. You're going to seal the exits once they're inside. No one gets out. But we'll be trapped too." "Exactly." For a moment their eyes met, hers steady, his searching. Then, wordlessly, he nodded. Outside, the compound came alive with the quiet choreography of invasion. Shadows cut across the ground. The faint hum of drones hovered above. And through the darkness, the first glint of movement. Rourke's men their visors reflecting red light like the eyes of predators. Elise slipped her sidearm back into its holster and picked up the fallen operative's rifle. The weight was familiar, almost nostalgic. "Stay behind me," she said, and stepped into the hallway. The base that had once trained soldiers now felt like a mausoleum, cold, metallic, echoing with the ghosts of orders shouted years ago. She moved down the corridor, past the locker rooms where recruits had laughed that morning, past the classrooms that still smelled faintly of gun oil and chalk. Then came the first breach. The maintenance door exploded inward, and a squad of 6 entered in tight formation. Elise dropped to one knee and fired 3 shots, clean and economical. 2 went down immediately. The third managed a desperate burst before Elise rolled behind a pillar. The rounds shattered concrete inches from her shoulder. She returned fire. 1 bullet, center mass, silence. The corridor filled with smoke, the acrid tang of burnt metal hanging in the air. Hugh's voice crackled over the handheld radio. "West corridor sealed. You've got 4 more inbound." "Good," she replied. "Let them in." She moved again, ghost-like, anticipating their angles, her instincts tuned to the geometry of war. Every turn became a calculation. Distance, cover, sightline, breath. She wasn't fighting to win, she was fighting to expose. Rourke's plan was unraveling, and he didn't even know it yet. At the far end of the hall, Hughes worked feverishly at the backup console. The system's firewall hissed in protest as he overrode command lines. The data from Project Atlas was uploading, not to any military database, but to the open network Elise had rerouted earlier. Every file, every signature, every redacted order was being copied into the wild. Rourke wouldn't just lose her. He'd lose the entire illusion. "Elise!" Hughes shouted as the door behind him shuddered under pressure. "They're breaching the server room." "I'm 2 minutes out," she replied. "Make it 1." The door finally burst and Hughes ducked as rounds tore through the air. He hit the floor, scrambling for the fallen rifle. His hands shook, but he fired anyway, short, frantic bursts that ricocheted off the metal frames. He wasn't precise, but he was lucky. One of his shots found its mark. When Elise arrived, the room was chaos. Shattered monitors, smoke, the sharp crack of burning circuits. She dropped 2 operatives before they could turn, then dragged Hughes behind a desk. "You okay?" He nodded, though his breath came in ragged bursts. "Data's uploading. 40%. Elise scanned the ceiling vents. "We'll need more time." A voice cut through the static of the base intercom. Calm, cold, familiar. Captain Hartman. Always the teacher, even in rebellion. Rourke's voice echoed down every corridor. "You're making a mess of things that were never meant for you to fix. Surrender, and I'll let the recruits live." Elise stood, staring at the speaker above her. "You're lying," she muttered. Hughes looked at her. "What if he's not?" She turned to him. "Then he dies slower." The intercom crackled again. "You always thought you were saving people, Elise. You never realized you were the experiment. Every mission, every test, they weren't studying the enemy. They were studying you, your instincts, your defiance. That's what Atlas is." Elise's hands tightened around her rifle. The truth landed like shrapnel, cold and jagged. All those years, all that loss, and she'd been the prototype. She shut her eyes for a moment, drawing one deep breath. "Then I'll make sure they never run that test again." The upload reached 70%. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Dozens more. Rourke wasn't sending soldiers now. He was sending a firing squad. Elise turned to Hughes. "Once the upload hits 100, you run. Find a way out through the north fence. Don't look back." He shook his head violently. "No, I'm staying with you." She smiled faintly, something soft flickering in her eyes. "You remind me of someone I used to be. Don't make the same mistake." He hesitated, but the look in her eyes wasn't one he could argue with. It wasn't command, it was legacy. "Upload at 90, he said. "Upload at 90, he said. The lights flickered again. Then the roof shattered. A breaching charge tore open the ceiling, and black-armored soldiers rappelled down like mechanical spiders. Elise dove for cover as bullets shredded the console. Sparks exploded across the floor. Hughes screamed, ducking low, covering his head. Elise rose into the chaos, her rifle blazing. 3 down, 4. She moved like a force of nature, fluid, efficient, terrifying. Every movement was memory, every killer ghost laid to rest. The last operator fell, and for a moment only silence remained, broken by the faint hum of the server. 100%, Hughes whispered. It's done. Elise stared at the screen, then so are we. She reached down, picked up a flash drive, and slipped it into his hand. If they find me, they'll bury me again. But someone will believe you. Take this, tell them what happened here. He shook his head. I can't leave you. You can, she said softly. And you will. Outside, through the broken roof, the whine of helicopters filled the air. The final wave had arrived. Elise turned her gaze toward the dark sky, her expression unreadable. Time to finish the lesson. She loaded her last magazine, chambered a round, and stepped toward the shattered doorway. The war that had started years ago in the desert had finally come home. The dawn was still hours away, but the compound glowed under the white blades of helicopter lights. The dust rose in slow spirals, dancing in the air like ghosts summoned by war. Elise Hartman stepped into the courtyard, her boots crunching over broken glass and shell casings. Around her, smoke drifted from shattered walls. The world she'd once rebuilt with discipline and purpose now looked like a graveyard of her own design. From above, the chopper's floodlight locked on her, pinning her in its artificial deck. The loudspeaker crackled with a voice she hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Elise, Major Rourke said, calm as a man reading scripture. You're still predictable. Always step into the open, waiting for the first shot. She didn't look up. Always easier to aim when they can see you, she muttered, just loud enough for herself. The chopper's engines roared as it descended, kicking up a cyclone of dust. From its belly, a ramp lowered, and dark silhouettes emerged, armored, precise, unhurried. But among them walked a man without a helmet. Tall, rigid, silver streaking the sides of his close-cropped hair. Rourke. He carried no visible weapon. That Elise knew was the greatest arrogance of all. When he stopped a few meters away, the noise of the rotor blades felt like thunder between them. His voice cut through it. Measured, steady, the way it always had been when he briefed her unit years ago. You could have walked away, he said. You had a peaceful life. Why come back to the dirt? She stared at him, eyes cold, because the dirt never let go. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came from believing you'd already won. You really think this changes anything? You leaked data to the world. Do you think anyone's going to believe the word of a ghost? She tilted her head slightly. Doesn't matter if they believe it. It's out there now. You can't erase it twice. Something flickered behind his eyes, annoyance quickly buried. He took a slow step closer. You were supposed to be the model, Isis. The one who proved emotion could be refined into obedience. We studied you for years, and you still think you're free. She holstered her weapon. You didn't study me, she said. You underestimated me. Rourke's voice hardened. You think the world cares about the difference? You'll die here, and history will write me as the man who stopped a rogue agent before she could destroy another command. You'll be remembered as a malfunction. Elise smiled faintly, and for the first time that night, she looked almost at peace. If that's what it takes to end this, then maybe a malfunction is exactly what the system needs. Rourke's jaw tightened. You really haven't changed. I have, she said. You just haven't noticed. She moved before he could speak again, 2 steps forward, faster than he expected. Her hand snapped out, striking his wrist, knocking the pistol from his grasp before he even registered pulling it. The motion was fluid, instinctive, the kind of speed that came from 1,000 repetitions and 0 hesitation. Rourke stumbled back, cursing under his breath, his calm unraveling in an instant. Still the perfect soldier, he spat. No, she said. The last free one. They circled each other. The rotors above sent waves of air that whipped through the courtyard, stirring dust into a halo of chaos. Around them, the last of his men hesitated. None dared move. This was personal. It always had been. Rourke lunged first, quick, brutal, efficient. Elise caught his arm, twisted, countered. Their movements weren't a fight. They were memory. two ghosts replaying a choreography that had been burned into their bodies. He slammed her against a wall, forearm pressing into her throat. "You think you're saving anyone?" he hissed. "You're just exposing what keeps them safe." She gritted her teeth. Safety built on silence isn't safety. It's control. Her knee shot upward, striking his rib. He staggered, just long enough for her to grab his collar and drive him against the opposite wall. The impact rattled the metal siding. His head snapped back. A smear of blood streaked across the panel. "Do you know what they told me after you vanished?" she said, her voice low and trembling. Not with fear, but rage contained for too long. "That I failed my mission. That my team died because of me. But they didn't die, did they? You erased them. You buried them under your goddamn experiments." Rourke laughed, blood in his teeth. "They volunteered, Elise. You all did. You just didn't read the fine print." She struck him again, a sharp backhand that split his lip. "You're lying." He smiled through the blood. "Am I?" For a moment, the world tilted. His words weren't designed to inform. They were meant to infect, to make her question. And for the smallest fraction of a second, it worked. But then she saw the faces, Ray's, Dalton, her team. Her family, gone without trace. And she remembered the moment before the ambush years ago. Rourke's voice over the comms, ordering a fallback that led them straight into an airstrike zone. He'd killed them to protect the project, and now he wanted her to forget again. She stepped back, steadying herself, her expression hardening into something glacial. "You made one mistake, Rourke." A single red light blinked softly on it. Rourke's eyes widened. "You wouldn't," she smiled. "You told me once that every soldier's purpose is to serve something greater. Tonight, that's the truth." He lunged for her, but she was faster. Her thumb pressed the switch. The explosion wasn't massive. It didn't need to be. The blast tore through the central relay tower, igniting the fuel lines and power grid that fed the compound. Fire bloomed outward, devouring the night. The shockwave knocked them both to the ground. Elise hit the dirt hard, the taste of blood in her mouth, ears ringing. The chopper spiraled, losing altitude, its engines coughing smoke. Around them, chaos erupted, shouts, flames, confusion. Rourke crawled toward her, coughing. "You'll kill us all," he gasped. She looked at him, her face illuminated by the fire's glow. "No," she whispered, "just the ghosts." From the corner of her vision she saw movement. Hughes, standing by the outer fence, holding the flash drive tight in his fist. He had escaped. Good. Rourke tried to reach for his weapon again, but Elise kicked it away, then knelt beside him. "You taught me that control is survival," she said softly. "But you forgot what comes after survival." He blinked, eyes glassy. "What's that? Purpose?" Then she stood, leaving him where he lay, and walked toward the inferno. The sky above the compound was burning, black smoke curling into the heavens. Every secret Rourke had built his empire on was now ash. Every file, every experiment, every trace of her containment wiped clean. Behind her, Rourke called her name once, a final echo swallowed by fire. She didn't look back. For the first time in years, Elise Hartman felt something close to peace. Not joy, not victory, but release. She had given the truth its chance to breathe. The compound collapsed behind her in a chorus of flame. Somewhere beyond the wire, dawn was finally breaking. The world didn't end with fire that night, but something inside it changed forever. By the time dawn spread its gray fingers across the horizon, the compound was nothing more than twisted steel and scorched earth. Smoke drifted upward in lazy spirals, like exhausted spirits escaping their cage. The wind carried the smell of burnt metal, and something older, something human. Far beyond the perimeter fence, Derek Hughes stumbled through the brush, clutching the flash drive like a relic. His body ached from shrapnel, lungs filled with dust, but he kept walking. Behind him, explosions popped in the distance, small dying echoes of a war he'd barely survived. He didn't look back. Elise Hartman's voice still rang in his head. "If they find me, they'll bury me again. But you, someone will believe you. The world had to. The world had to." When he reached the main road, he collapsed near an abandoned checkpoint. His fingers trembled as he pulled out a satellite communicator. A civilian model Elise had given him days before, claiming it was for emergencies. The screen flickered weakly, searching for a signal through the static haze of jamming fields. Minutes passed. Then a connection. Unknown user, identify, came the voice. A US military operator, half asleep, completely unaware of what had burned hours ago. "This is Recruit Derek Hughes," he gasped. "Base Delta 9, training facility. It's gone. Everyone's gone." The operator hesitated. "You're saying—" "I have evidence," Hughes said quickly. "Proof of unauthorized operations, classified experiments. They killed her. Captain Elise Hartman. They killed all of them." Static swallowed the line for a moment. Then the operator returned, voice suddenly sharper. "Stay where you are, recruit. Help is on the way." He didn't believe it. Help wasn't coming. But he sent the files anyway, dragging the flash drive into the transmission queue and hitting send all. The data transfer bar began to crawl across the screen. 1%, 5%, 18%. Every second felt like a century. When it hit 100, Hughes let the communicator drop to the dirt. His breath came in uneven gasps. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a strange calm began to settle. He had done it. Elise's war wasn't just hers anymore. It had entered the bloodstream of the world. The first reports appeared 48 hours later, small, cautious, easily dismissed. An unexplained explosion at a remote training site. Military authorities investigating possible sabotage. But then came the leaks, anonymous uploads of classified files across independent networks, thousands of documents stamped with Department of Defense insignia. Project Atlas, behavioral conditioning programs, Shadow Initiative, and Elise Hartman's name. The story spread like wildfire. Within days, journalists, whistleblowers, and veterans flooded every platform with questions the government refused to answer. Who was Captain Hartman? What was Project Atlas? How long has this been happening? There were no official statements, only silence. But silence, when exposed to truth, becomes its own confession. Somewhere in Washington, a general resigned without explanation. A senator publicly demanded a hearing. Funding for several training programs was suddenly frozen pending investigation. And across the ocean, in an unnamed black site, Major Rourke's body was never found. The fire had erased too much. Some said he burned. Others whispered he escaped. But one truth remained certain. His empire of secrets was gone. Weeks passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But fragments of Elise's story refused to fade. In a quiet veterans' shelter in Virginia, a group of retired soldiers gathered one evening to watch a news report about the Delta 9 incident. The anchor's voice was measured, detached, professional. But when Elise's photo appeared, a grainy image from years ago, her eyes sharp, mouth set in that unflinching half-smile, the room fell silent. One of the men, old and tired, set down his coffee. "That's Hartman," he said softly. "She saved my team in Kandahar. We thought she died out there." Another nodded. Maybe she finally got her peace. No one spoke after that. The TV kept talking, but nobody listened. The silence between them said enough. Meanwhile, in a safe house tucked deep in the Appalachian woods, Hughes sat by a flickering fire. His wounds had healed into pale scars, reminders carved into skin. The flash drive lay on the table beside him, empty now, its data long dispersed across the digital ether. He'd spent days searching for Elise's body among the ruins, but the fire had left nothing. No remains, no dog tags, no trace. Some said she'd perished in the blast. Others, those who had known her, weren't so sure. Hughes wasn't either. He remembered the way she moved that night. Not reckless, but intentional. Like someone who had already decided how the story would end. He thought about her last words, the way her voice had carried not despair, but certainty. The ones who survive don't do it by running. They do it by deciding what's worth dying for. He had decided too. Every few days he opened a secure network under an alias, Echo 9. He uploaded recovered fragments of the Project Atlas archives, one file at a time, making sure the truth stayed alive, impossible to bury. And every time he logged in, He received a message notification from an untraceable source. No name, no location, just 3 words. "Keep going, Hughes." He tried to dismiss it as coincidence, a trick of automated systems, a ghost in the machine. But the phrasing, the cadence, felt like her. Calm, precise, familiar. He smiled the way she used to, quiet, dangerous, unbroken. Outside, snow began to fall over the mountains, soft and soundless. He looked up at the horizon, where dawn was beginning to bleed through the treetops. For the first time since that night, he didn't feel lost. He felt guided. Months later, deep in the ruins of what was once Base Delta 9, a recovery team found something beneath the collapsed command wing. A single locker sealed tight under concrete. Inside was a folded flag, a broken watch, and a field notebook burned around the edges. On the first page, scorched but legible, someone had written, "The mission was never about surviving. It was about making sure survival meant something." No signature, just initials. E.H., the soldier who found it, stared at the notebook for a long time before closing it gently. "Ma'am," he whispered, almost reverently, though no one was there to hear him. He placed it back in the locker, sealed it, and walked away. The ruins stayed silent, but somewhere beyond them, beyond the reach of fire, government, or history, the wind carried a faint echo. It wasn't grief. It wasn't vengeance. It was a promise. And for those who had heard her name, Elise Hartman was no longer just a soldier. She was a warning, a legend whispered through barracks and battlefields, a ghost in the system reminding every recruit, every commander, every hidden hand. You don't aim a rifle at someone like her, unless you're ready to learn why you never should. Years passed. Bases were rebuilt. Names changed. But the story of Delta 9, the inferno, the cover-ups, the woman who refused to kneel, kept surfacing in whispers that wouldn't die. New recruits heard fragments during night drills. A tale of a captain whose soldiers turned their rifles on her and lived just long enough to regret it. Officers dismissed it as myth, yet no one laughed when the lights flickered in the training halls, or when encrypted systems glitched for a heartbeat and flashed 3 letters. E.H. No one claimed responsibility. No one dared. Derek Hughes lived quietly in a small town outside Asheville, working as a mechanic. He didn't talk about Delta 9. When strangers asked about his limp, he said accident and changed the subject. But sometimes, when he looked up from under the hood of a car, he saw things that shouldn't be there. An unmarked SUV parked too long, a drone hovering higher than usual, a figure in a grey coat at the edge of the lot. And always, after those sightings, the same message would appear in his encrypted inbox. "Still breathing, then keep working." He never replied, but he always obeyed. He leaked carefully chosen pieces of Project Atlas data to investigative reporters, keeping the fire alive but controlled. Enough to feed public scrutiny, not enough to expose the people still buried inside the machine. The work consumed him, yet it steadied him. He'd stopped dreaming of war and started dreaming of purpose. One evening, a stranger walked into his garage. A woman in her 30s, dark hair cut short, a faded tactical jacket, eyes that looked both too young and too old. She handed him a small black box and said simply, "From Echo." Before he could ask, she was gone. Inside the box was a data chip and a note written in a familiar, steady hand. "They're rebuilding it under another name." "You know what to do." His throat tightened. He slipped the note into his jacket and powered up the chip. Blue light filled the room, maps and dossiers flickering across the walls. Fresh faces, new code names, same sins. Project Atlas was reborn. He knew what it meant. He'd have to burn it again. And for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. He felt chosen. Meanwhile, in the mountains beyond Quantico, a training facility opened under a new directive, Operation Nova. Officially, it was a leadership program for ethical resilience in combat operations. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. Inside its reinforced walls, candidates underwent simulations unlike any other. Moral stress drills, zero visibility rescues, loyalty tests that pushed the mind to its breaking point. They called it the Hartman Protocol. Instructors never explained the name. They just pointed to the creed carved into the concrete at the entrance. Strength without conscience is destruction. Conscience without strength is surrender. Find the balance or fall. No one knew who had written those words. But veterans swore it wasn't a general or a politician. They said it came from the woman who had exposed them all. They said it came from Elise Hartman. Some nights, long after curfew, recruits claimed to see a shadow walking the perimeter. Tall, confident, carrying herself like someone who'd seen too many wars. The cameras caught nothing, but the dogs grew restless whenever the wind carried a faint scent of burned gunpowder and pine. Ghost stories, the instructor said, maybe. But deep beneath the facility, sealed behind encrypted servers, lay an operating system designed by an anonymous architect. Its signature key bore a single name, Echo 9. It watched, it learned, it intervened when needed. And sometimes, late at night, one of the system screens would flicker with a message typed in the old font used at Delta 9. Not all ghosts haunt. Some guard. Derek Hughes never saw Elise again. Not truly. But on a rainy November evening, as he drove home along the winding mountain road, he caught a glimpse of someone walking along the ridge. A woman in a worn field coat, her hair silvered at the edges, her stride unmistakable. She paused for a moment, looking down at the valley, then turned toward him. The headlights caught her face for an instant. Calm, unbroken, alive. He blinked. She was gone. He pulled over, heart pounding. But there was nothing except rain and mist and the faint smell of cordite, like the air after a rifle's final shot. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Guess you never really left," he whispered. Then he drove on, the mountains closing behind him, the storm rolling over the ridges like applause. Somewhere far from roads and cities, a cabin sat hidden among the trees. Inside, a woman cleaned a disassembled rifle with practiced precision. On the table lay a folded flag, a broken watch, and a laptop displaying live feeds from around the world. Corruption, greed, injustice. The fight never ended, it only changed uniforms. She smiled faintly, a scar pulling at her lip. "All right, Hughes," she murmured. "Let's see who's next. Let's see who's next." Her fingers danced across the keyboard, activating a chain of encrypted transmissions. Dozens of anonymous allies, reporters, whistleblowers, soldiers, received a single line of text. The ghost lives. The mission continues. And somewhere, on the other side of the world, someone whispered her name like a prayer. Elise Hartman, the soldier who refused to stay buried. The one who taught them all that survival without meaning is just another kind of death. And as the wind howled through the trees, carrying snow and silence together, her voice seemed to echo through the night. "If they aim at you again, remind them who taught you to stand." The mountains answered with thunder, and the legend of the Special Forces vet who would not die became part of every story told in every barracks where courage still had a name. She was no longer flesh and bone. She was a code, a creed, a ghost. And ghosts, after all, never fade.